Now I'm going to tell you the stuff you don't know about. He's never forgiven me for playing this part. But my contact with him was first.
He's perfectionist, as almost everyone we've discussed would fall into that personality characteristic.
Jack Nicholson has been the face of Hollywood rebellion, charming, unpredictable, and utterly unforgettable. With his devilish grin and unmatched charisma, he conquered every role, from The Shining's madness to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest's genius. But behind that iconic smile was a man who carried grudges deeply, especially toward one figure he could never forgive, a man he once trusted, admired, and even called a friend. Hollywood insiders have whispered for years about Nicholson's infamous temper and his unwillingness to fake friendships. He was known to forgive small slights, but betrayal? Never. And this particular feud, the one that defined his private anger for decades, remains one of the most shocking in showbiz history. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about loyalty. The man Nicholson despised wasn't just another actor or rival. He was someone who had stood by his side during his wildest years, shared the same stages, the same women, the same dangerous lifestyle. Yet somewhere along the way, trust turned to resentment, and friendship became venom. As the years went on, the story of what truly happened between them was buried beneath the glitter of Hollywood parties and tabloid rumors. But those who knew Jack best insist the hatred was real, raw, personal, and lasting, until his final days in the spotlight. Now, as new revelations surface, the truth about Jack Nicholson's most bitter feud is finally being exposed. And it reveals a side of him that's darker, more vulnerable, and far more human than anyone ever imagined. Before the feud, before the heartbreak, and long before the world saw the darker side of Jack Nicholson's personality, there was the story of an ambitious young man determined to conquer Hollywood. Born in New Jersey in 1937, Nicholson's beginnings were humble, even mysterious. He grew up believing his mother was his sister and his grandmother was his mother, a family secret he didn't discover until adulthood. That revelation would later shape his complex view of trust and loyalty, two things he guarded fiercely for the rest of his life. When Nicholson arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, he was just another struggling actor trying to make ends meet. He worked odd jobs at MGM's cartoon department and auditioned endlessly, often turned down for being too intense. But that same intensity soon became his greatest weapon. By the 1960s, he had made a name for himself as Hollywood's rebellious outsider, unpredictable, magnetic, and unapologetically real. His breakout came with Easy Rider in 1969, a film that captured the counterculture spirit of the time. Suddenly, Jack wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol of rebellion. Hollywood had found its anti-hero, and audiences couldn't get enough. The years that followed brought him Oscar-winning performances in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Terms of Endearment, along with unforgettable roles in The Shining, Chinatown, and Batman. But behind the fame, Jack's life was fueled by chaos. He surrounded himself with artists, musicians, and Hollywood's most controversial figures, people who lived fast, loved freely, and broke every rule imaginable. And among them was a man who would later become the source of Jack's deepest resentment. At first, they were inseparable. They shared a mutual respect, both known for their raw talent and wild behavior. Hollywood insiders described them as brothers in chaos. They attended the same parties in the Hollywood Hills, dated the same women, and defended each other in the press. To outsiders, their friendship seemed unbreakable, two icons who understood each other's madness. But as fame grew, so did ego. Success, jealousy, and betrayal began to eat away at their bond. Those who knew them said it wasn't one single event that broke their friendship, but a series of wounds, lies, stolen roles, and personal betrayals that neither man could let go of. Jack Nicholson's circle was small, and trust was everything to him. Once someone crossed that line, he was done. No explanations, no second chances. And when this man crossed it, Nicholson's reaction was explosive. He never spoke publicly about what happened, but his silence was louder than any words. In the decades that followed, Hollywood's rumor mill spun countless stories. Some said the feud began over a woman. Others claimed it was about a role Jack believed had been stolen from him. Whatever the reason, one truth became clear. Jack Nicholson truly hated him. Even his closest friends avoided bringing up the man's name in conversation. As Jack's career reached legendary status, his attitude toward betrayal hardened. "You can forgive a lot of things," he once told a journalist, "but you can't forgive someone who makes you feel like a fool." That cryptic statement, many believe, was aimed directly at the man who had once been his closest friend. And as the years went by, the bitterness didn't fade. It became part of Jack's identity, the unspoken shadow behind his laughter, his charm and his mischievous grin, because in Hollywood, where fame fades and loyalty is rare, even legends like Jack Nicholson learn that not every friendship is meant to last, and some wounds never truly heal. By the late 1970s, Jack Nicholson had become a king among Hollywood royalty. His fame was unstoppable, his reputation untouchable, and his circle exclusive. He was the man everyone wanted to know, but only a few truly did. Among those few was a fellow actor and friend who had earned Jack's trust early in his career. Together they had shared laughter, parties, and even heartbreak. But somewhere in that golden era of fame and excess, their bond would shatter in a way that Jack would never forgive. The betrayal came quietly, not with a public scandal, but with a private wound. According to several insiders from the era, the man in question wasn't just another colleague. He was a rival who wanted everything Jack had. Fame, power, women, and respect. For years, he had stood in Jack's shadow, waiting for his moment to rise. That opportunity came when a major film role, one originally written with Jack in mind, was suddenly handed to his so-called friend instead. It was said that this friend had used backroom influence and whispered rumors to convince the studio that Jack was too unstable for the project. When Jack learned the truth, his fury was volcanic. Not only had he lost a role that could have defined another phase of his career, but he had been betrayed by someone he once called a brother. Hollywood's elite quickly noticed the tension. At events, Jack would walk out of rooms when the man entered. At parties, he would refuse to make eye contact. And when journalists tried to ask about their fallout, Jack would deflect with his trademark grin, muttering, "You don't talk about snakes once you've been bitten." It didn't end there. The man continued to thrive, taking roles and recognition that many believed should have gone to Nicholson. But while his rival chased the spotlight, Jack retreated deeper into his own world, one filled with quiet anger and cynicism. He poured that energy into his performances, channeling his rage into some of the most intense roles of his career. In films like The Shining and Chinatown, his characters weren't just acting. They were Jack's own emotions bleeding through the screen. Directors who worked with him during that time described him as possessed, methodical, and carrying something heavy. That something, as friends later revealed, was his bitterness toward the man who betrayed him. Their paths crossed only once more in the early 90s at an awards ceremony. Witnesses recalled the atmosphere freezing when they locked eyes. Jack, known for his sharp wit and fearless charm, offered only a cold, wordless stare. His rival tried to smile, to extend a handshake, but Jack turned away, whispering something under his breath that no one could hear. Years later, in a rare interview, Jack was asked if he had ever truly hated anyone. His answer was chillingly calm. Only one. And that's enough for a lifetime. He never said the name, but everyone in the industry knew exactly who he meant. As time went on, Jack's hatred didn't fade. It hardened. He was a man who could forgive almost anything. Wild nights, broken promises, even public embarrassment. But betrayal was his breaking point. Those close to him often said it wasn't about revenge. It was about pride. For Jack, trust was sacred, and once broken, it was gone forever. That deep sense of loyalty was both his greatest strength and his greatest curse. Because while it made him fiercely loyal to those he loved, it also left him permanently wounded by those who wronged him. And as his career continued to soar, his circle grew smaller, his laughter quieter, and his eyes, once filled with mischief, began to hold something else entirely. The memory of a friendship that died in betrayal. By the mid-1990s, Jack Nicholson had become more than a movie star. He was a living legend. But with that legendary status came isolation. The man who had once been surrounded by friends, musicians, and filmmakers now kept his circle tight. And while his name continued to dominate Hollywood, one shadow always lingered, the name of the man he swore never to forgive. The feud between Jack Nicholson and his one-time friend had evolved into something far darker than an argument. It had become a Cold War, a silent, unspoken battle that lasted for decades. The two never exchanged public insults, never clashed at award shows, and never addressed each other in interviews. Yet everyone in Hollywood knew the hostility ran deep. Their silence was its own kind of violence. Producers learned to avoid casting them in the same film. Journalists stopped asking about the feud altogether, knowing that even mentioning the other man's name could end an interview instantly. Jack would simply smile that famous smile, cold, sarcastic, and final, the kind that said, "Don't go there." But beneath the bravado, there was pain. Friends from that period recall Jack often retreating into solitude between shoots. He had always been a man who loved company, women, poker nights, Lakers games, but something in him had changed. One friend described it best. He wasn't angry anymore. He was disappointed. Rumors continued to swirl about the true cause of their fallout. Some claimed the betrayal involved not just a stolen role, but also a woman, someone Jack had loved deeply and trusted. Whether or not that story was true, it only deepened the mystery. The tabloids fed on it, turning their broken friendship into a Hollywood ghost story. As Jack grew older, he began to reflect more on his past. During interviews, he would occasionally make cryptic remarks about trust and friendship. In one conversation, when asked if he ever regretted losing certain people in his life, he paused for a long time before replying, "You can't regret losing people who showed you who they really are." His rival, meanwhile, tried several times to reconcile, or at least to clear his name. He sent word through mutual friends, even writing a letter that reportedly went unread. Jack wanted no part of it. "Forgiveness," he once said, "is something you give to make yourself feel better. I already feel fine." As the years passed, the tension became almost mythical. Two Hollywood giants, forever linked by a friendship that had imploded, continued to orbit each other in silence. Awards ceremonies, charity events, and private parties became quiet battlegrounds of avoidance. Each man's presence reminded the other of a past too painful to revisit. And yet, in that silence, there was also a strange kind of respect. Neither man ever spoke publicly against the other. There were no tell-all books, no tabloid confessions. It was as if both understood that what had been broken could never be repaired, and that some wounds were better left untouched. By the time Jack Nicholson began stepping back from acting in the 2010s, many believed he had finally moved on, but those who knew him best said otherwise. In his home, tucked away in the Hollywood Hills, Jack often watched old films late into the night, sometimes his own, sometimes his rivals'. When his friend's movie would come on screen, he would stare quietly for a few moments before changing the channel. One longtime friend revealed he never forgot, but he also never stopped caring in his own way. That's what made it tragic, because for Jack Nicholson, hatred was never simple anger. It was the flip side of love, the residue of loyalty betrayed. And though he would never admit it out loud, everyone close to him knew. The man he claimed to hate the most was once the person he cared about more than anyone else. As Jack Nicholson grew older, the fire that once fueled his larger-than-life personality began to dim. He slowly stepped away from the cameras, the parties, and the endless Hollywood chaos that had defined his youth. His legendary grin appeared less often in public, and sightings of the once ever-present star became rare. Friends said he preferred quiet evenings at his home in the Hollywood Hills, surrounded by old film reels, Lakers memorabilia, and photographs from a past that could never be repeated. But beneath that stillness, one emotion remained: the lingering bitterness toward the man he had never forgiven. In those final active years, Jack reflected deeply on the choices that had defined him, the friendships he lost, the loves that slipped away, and the bridges he burned. The feud that had haunted him for decades became a ghost that visited him in his solitude. He never mentioned his rival's name, but every time the subject of betrayal came up, the tone in his voice changed, sharp, cold, and distant. "You don't forget something like that," he told a close confidant. "You just learn to live with it." In truth, the feud had become much more than a grudge. It was a symbol of Jack's entire view of life. He believed the world was built on loyalty, and when someone violated that sacred trust, there was no going back. To him, hatred wasn't about rage. It was about principle. And while some called it pride, those who knew him best called it pain. As his health began to decline and his once busy phone stopped ringing, Jack spent more time alone, revisiting old memories. Occasionally, he would rewatch his films, his eyes softening when scenes reminded him of younger days, of wild nights, deep laughter, and friendships that once felt unbreakable. But every so often, a film starring him, the man Jack swore to hate, would appear on screen. And though Jack would pause for a moment, his reaction was always the same. He would quietly switch off the television and walk away. Despite the bitterness, some close to Jack believed he secretly longed for closure. In his later years, he became more sentimental, reaching out to old friends, making peace with certain people from his past. But when it came to the man he once loved like a brother, he couldn't take that step. Pride, or perhaps pain, wouldn't allow it. One insider shared that Jack once admitted, "If I talk to him again, it means he wins, and I'm not built for losing." Then, years later, when the man Jack had despised passed away, the world waited to see how Nicholson would respond. Would he finally speak? Would he reveal what really happened between them? Instead, he did what he always did best. He said nothing. No statement, no tribute, not even a public appearance. But privately, one of his closest friends claimed that Jack spent that night sitting in silence, watching an old movie they had once worked on together. For the first time in years, tears fell from the eyes of a man who had once seemed untouchable. That night revealed the truth Jack had carried all along. That hatred, at its core, is often just love that has nowhere left to go. His anger, his silence, his lifelong grudge, it all came from heartbreak. Because in the end, the man he truly hated wasn't his enemy. He was a reflection of everything Jack once valued and lost. As Nicholson faded from the public eye, Hollywood remembered him not only as one of the greatest actors of all time, but as a deeply human man. One who lived passionately, loved fiercely, and refused to compromise on loyalty. His story became a reminder that even legends carry wounds, and even the strongest hearts can break from betrayal. Because for Jack Nicholson, the tragedy wasn't that he hated someone so deeply. It was that once upon a time he loved him even more.